Kalispedasis. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well. Allow me to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to tonight's presentation by postgraduate student Naz Vardar on shaping Vlach identity, local agents, and transnational competition in Ottoman Manastir in the early 20th century. Just some household items before we continue. As we enter winter, all the seminars this month and also early July will be online with international guests, so please look out for them. They'll be on quite a diverse range of topics, from political prisoners, stolen children, and gender in the Greek language. Specifically, next week's Thursday 19th of seminar will be by Athens-based academic Polimeris Voglis, and he'll be speaking on political prisoners in 20th century Greece. And for the most part of the 20th century, yes, Greece did have political prisoners of conscience. A few other household items. There is a Kavafi for Beginners workshop that will take place in August. Spaces are limited. There are a handful of spots left, so while there are still slots available, they'll be delivered by Professor Michalis Bakoyannis from the Apostolic University of Thessaloniki. Furthermore, for those who are members of the Greek community of Melbourne, there's the annual AGM, which is taking place at Alton Grammar this Sunday at 1 p.m. You're all encouraged to attend. Now let's return to tonight's topic on Vlach identity. Where does one start in describing what is Vlach identity? There have been whole conferences on it, and one could have a whole course on this topic alone. Very broadly, Vlach identity is a multifaceted concept encompassing a group of Romance-speaking populations in the Balkans, primarily known for their distinct cultural and linguistic heritage. The identity of these groups is shaped by their unique traditions, their historical experiences, and interactions with other cultures and national identities. When the term Vlach is used in various contexts, its meaning can also vary depending on the region and historical period. In the modern-day sense, Vlachs refer to speakers of the Eastern Romance languages who live south of the Danube in Albania, Bulgaria, in Greece, North Macedonia, and Eastern Serbia. Now, let's get back to the end of the 19th, early 20th century, to Ottoman Macedonia, to the city of Manastir, or Monastiri in Greek, today's city of Bitola. Monastir was a multi-ethnic entrepot with a very large concentration of Romanians. It was a very prosperous trading center in Ottoman Macedonia, second only to Thessaloniki. In an era of competing nationalisms and aspiring ethnic identities, the Vlachs became involved in this contestation of identity in the Balkans. Being a relatively small group, they became caught up in the larger power dynamics of the Balkan region, especially to the overtures of Greek and Romanian authorities. All this was occurring while the Ottoman state was trying to retain some sort of administrative control and preventing the breakup of the empire. This will be the focus of tonight's presentation. And we'd like to have invited back Naz Vardar to give us his presentation. One of the aims of this series has always been to act as a platform for up-and-coming scholars and to give opportunities to expound upon their research. Naz is a PhD candidate in the History Department of Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, specializing in the social and cultural history of the Ottoman Empire, modern Greece, and modern Turkey, while exploring themes of nationalism, class, gender, sexuality, and emotions. Before joining Simon Fraser University, she earned a BA and MA in history from Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. Naz, the floor is yours, and welcome back.
I want to thank again Nick for the introduction and Greek community of Melbourne for offering us this space, especially to young scholars, to share our work for a larger community and audience. And in this talk, I want to do a few things without oversimplifying the complexity of the subject. On the surface, this is the story of one ordinary individual, a priest from Ottoman Manastir, Papa Theodore, whose name appears in various archival material in the early 20th century. What we see in his story is more than personal. It's the story of a transformation and shift of identities from Rum to Vlach, shaped at the crossroads of empire, nation, and everyday life. But his story is neither unique nor isolated. He lived through what contemporaries call the Macedonian question or the Macedonian struggle. It was a time when neighboring states like Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and later Romania were all making claims over Ottoman Macedonia, while the Ottoman Empire attempted to maintain a fragile balance in the region. So, another aim of this talk is to situate this individual story within those larger dynamics and to show how identity, especially in contested borderlands, could be shaped, reinforced, or manipulated by multiple forces: communal, ecclesiastical, diplomatic, and imperial. In tracing this priest transformation, we'll see how identity wasn't just personal affiliation, but something negotiated at many levels and often under pressure. Papa Theodore's identity was shaped between local needs at Monastir, Ottoman state's policy of balance, claims of the Romanian state in Macedonia, and the ecumenical patriarchate's efforts to protect their flock. I should also say that I'm not a specialist in the Vlach community's history or culture. My research focuses on carnival culture in the late Ottoman world, and it's not a coincidence that this story begins with a carnival. So what drew me into his story was a document I found in the Ottoman State Archives describing a carnival scene in Monastir in February 1904. At first glance, it's playful, even absurd. Teenagers in costume, a strange banner, some disruption in the streets. But that moment, as we'll see, was a surface expression of a deeper tension surrounding language, ritual, identity, and power in the region. And it's from that carnival and that document that this story unfolds. So now I want to summarize you the document and what happened on February 22, 1904 in the city of Manastir, then part of the Ottoman Empire and today in the Republic of North Macedonia. The streets were alive with carnival. It was likely the final day of festivities before Katara Deftera, the start of Megali Sarakosti, or Great Lent. Teenagers and adults filled the streets in masks and costumes, probably playing music, dancing, and celebrating. Among them were 3 boys from Rum millet, the Orthodox Christian population of the empire. These 3 Rum boys were in disguise. One wore a hat, one dressed as a woman, and one had put on Kavas uniform, as the document tells us. And here in the slide, you can see a Kavas uniform from Thessaloniki. It's a kind of a clothing worn by the armed guards of European consuls who were numerous in Monastir at the time. But these boys weren't just playing dress up. They were carrying a banner. The banner was painted in the colors of the Romanian flag, a vertical tricolor of blue, yellow, and red. And it bore a short, provocative phrase, Çingene Konsolos. So this was the phrase recorded in Ottoman Turkish in the archival document. We don't know in which language the banner was originally written, perhaps in Greek, and the Ottoman scribe most probably just translated it for bureaucratic purposes, for record keeping. So literally, Çingene Konsolos means gypsy consul, but Çingene is not a neutral term. It's a pejorative one for Roma people, much like the Greek word Tiganos. We don't yet know who these boys were targeting with that label. The document doesn't specify that part exactly. But what is clear is that this performance, this banner, was deemed serious enough to get the boys arrested, and that's why they made their way into the state archives. At the beginning of the 20th century, carnivals were not unfamiliar to the Ottoman authorities. They knew these were times of inversion, satire, and mockery, often tolerated as part of the festivities. So why, I ask, did this particular moment get documented and acted upon? The answer lies in the final lines of the report. The Ottoman official speculates that this act may have been a protest, a deliberate act of resentment toward a certain Papa Theodore, a local Rum priest who had recently become a Vlach priest. So this phrase caught my attention. What did it mean for someone to become a Vlach priest? How could one simply stop being Rum and start being Vlach? Why would that provoke protest in a carnival? I was lucky. I had a name to pursue. I searched for Papa Theodore's name in the Ottoman State Archives, and he appeared again and again in 1904, 1905, and 1906. His name surfaced in conflicts, petitions, complaints, a trail of bureaucratic friction, as well as newspapers in Greek, English, and French. So the central conflict he provoked was performing religious services in Romanian, in Vlach language, as noted in both Ottoman archival documents and contemporary newspapers. This act placed him in direct violation of the ecumenical patriarchate's canon law, and spoiler alert here, he was eventually excommunicated for performing the service in a language other than Greek. But of course, this story is more complicated than that. So this wasn't just a carnival prank, it was the beginning of a story that connected a local priest, teenagers in disguise, a diplomatic tension between the Romanian state, the ecumenical patriarchate, and the Ottoman Empire. What started as a curious moment in Carnival evolved into a window onto something bigger. Papa Theodore's story reveals that identity in early 20th century Macedonia was not simply a matter of personal choice or fixed national categories. It was shaped in the space between local community pressures and transregional politics, between everyday life and imperial ambitions. His case highlights the often overlooked role of the Romanian state in the Macedonian struggle, while showing how ordinary people played active roles in shaping and negotiating identity in contested spaces. And that's what I want to explore with you today. So let's slowly break down this document, supported with other historical material, and try to understand the significance of the story. So I'd like to begin with a discussion of Carnival, not just because that's where this particular story starts, but because Carnival offers a unique kind of access into everyday life and people's mentalities and experiences. The fact that this entire episode comes to us through Carnival, a carnival scene, is itself meaningful. Carnival appears here not just as a setting, but as a historical event in which ordinary people could make their voices heard and assert their agency in public space. We should also remember that Carnival, by its very nature, is a subversive form of celebration, which doesn't necessarily align with the official religion. And it's a space for coded critique, masked expression, and communal laughter. Natalie Zeman Davis, writing about early modern Europe, famously showed how Carnival functioned as a stage for social conflict, satire, inversion, mimicry allowed communities to experience tensions that might otherwise remain suppressed. Her work helped historians understand festive space not merely as celebration, but as kind of a political theater, a stage where ordinary people could act out of grievances, critique power, or rehearse forms of change, all under the cover of laughter. I'll go back to the images here just to give an idea. So the early 20th century was a time when everyday life in Macedonia was dominated by gang violence, overlapping territorial claims, and competing nationalisms. Scholars have shown how identity was often negotiated through acts of violence or shaped by the tools of the state or education. But in this case, Carnival opens a different kind of window, one that makes space for joy, parody, and irreverence. I find that significant. It allows us to see how communities express resistance, tension, or identity not just through violence, but through performances and play. While carnival studies in the Western European context are extensive and rich, the carnivals of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Ottoman world have only recently begun to draw sustained attention. Dr. Nikos Potamianos' monograph examines the transformation of Athenian carnivals from 1800s to 1940. Through them, he traces broader social shifts in class structures, gender roles, and political tensions. I agree with his approach that carnivals were moments when competing forces and rival ideologies could be staged by ordinary people in public space. The 1904 Manastir Carnival is one such case, where teenagers, equipped with costumes and a sign, performed the clash of identities using the symbolic and strategic language that the festive atmosphere allowed. This is significant not just for what it says, but for how it says it, a rare entry point into the everyday mentality of the time. Dr. Sada Payır, doing exciting work on the transgressions in the Greek Orthodox community in Asia Minor, adds another important perspective in her 2020 article in the Turkish journal Toplumsal Tarih. She reveals how carnivals in the Ottoman Istanbul were a space where people from diverse backgrounds came together to violate social norms, moral codes, and legal boundaries. According to her findings, Ottoman authorities largely tolerated this behavior unless it crossed the boundaries of religious and ethnic realms. My ongoing research on carnivals in Istanbul and Macedonia confirms this tension. As I presented previously 2 years ago for the Greek community of Melbourne, Ottoman authorities in Istanbul appeared cautious, but largely uninvolved. The only instance of police intervention I found concerned Muslim men cross-dressing during Carnival, suggesting that the threshold for interference was crossed only when gender norms were visibly transgressed or when behavior took on a religiously provocative tone, especially in the empire's final decades. But Macedonia tells a different story. In Ottoman Macedonia, carnival performances frequently carried explicit political content. Symbols of emerging nation states were common: flags, royal portraits, national colors. Public humiliation and mockery between Greek and Bulgarian-speaking communities were not unusual. In this context, the 1904 Manastir Carnival is not an outlier. These kids masquerading were not doing anything unfamiliar for a carnival, but they were absolutely pointing to a very particular and very sensitive political issue: shifting identities. So there's a substantial body of scholarship on the Ottoman Balkans and Macedonia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Scholars such as İpek Yosmaoğlu and Isa Bulumi have demonstrated how identities during the imperial period were fluid, negotiated, and often imposed through instruments like violence, censuses, and bureaucratic reform, and education as well. The story of Papa Theodore is deeply embedded in these processes. His case opened up a space to discuss Vlach identity and Romania's involvement in shaping it, a topic often marginalized in broader regional historiography. Writing the history of Vlachs has always been a contested and complicated task, as the community's experience has been shaped and claimed through competing nationalisms and state projects. By tracing that experience through the story of a single individual, I aim to challenge essentialist narratives and open up a more nuanced reading of what it meant to be a Vlach in the context of empire and its disintegration. So let's now turn to the identities involved in this story. Who were the Vlachs? A difficult question to answer. What does it mean for someone to shift from being a room priest to becoming a Vlach priest? Why would a group of room teenagers respond to that transformation with mockery? And why would they choose the Romanian flag as their symbol of protest? And what does a consul have to do with all these? So to answer these questions, we need some context. Let's start with who the Vlachs were and are. The Vlachs are an Orthodox Christian ethnic community who lived primarily in the Pindus Mountains and throughout Macedonia. They spoke a Romanian, a Latin-based language, but most were multilingual. The Ottoman document refers to their language as Vlach language. That's why sometimes through my talk, I'll be switching to Vlach language and Romanian. I use them interchangeably. So Vlachs were often multilingual, fluent in Greek, Albanian, Bulgarian, or Turkish, depending on the region they lived. Under the Ottoman rule, they were included in the Rum millet, the administrative category that encompassed all Orthodox Christians. Thus, Greek-speaking ethnic Greeks and Vlachs in the Ottoman Empire were part of the same administrative category in the Ottoman eyes. As a result of that, Vlachs were also adhering to the ecumenical patriarchate in Constantinople. And this is important because this is going to be the central spot of the conflict we'll see further on. So in Manastir, a city well integrated into Greek-speaking intellectual and commercial networks, Vlachs had been settling since the 18th century. Many became part of the Greek commercial and educational networks. Attending Greek schools and embracing Greek cultural life was a pathway to upward mobility. As historian Vasileios Gounaris notes, this identification with Greekness wasn't necessarily ideological, but it was mostly pragmatic. So in this fluid social landscape, identity was not static. It remained open to negotiation. By the early 20th century, the Macedonian struggle had begun to harden these boundaries of identities. Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and later Romania were all laying territorial and cultural claims to Ottoman Macedonia. And one way they did this was by claiming populations, by asserting that certain linguistic or ethnic groups naturally belong to their state's national cause. So let's see the link between Vlachs and Romanians in this context. Starting in the late 19th century, Romania began promoting a vision of the Vlachs as linguistic kin, a scattered Latin people who, with Romanian guidance, could be reawakened. A Romanian language was the key here. Its Latin roots were imagined as part of the Romanian cultural family. Romanian schools and churches began appearing throughout Macedonia as early as 1860s. Romanian agents and teachers were sent to reinforce the connection. According to historian Andrei Dansorescu, Vlachs were imagined by the young Romanian state as the natural bourgeoisie of the Balkans, destined to lead Romanian cultural and economic expansion in the region and in Romania. Still, the impact of Romanian propaganda was uneven in Macedonia. Contemporary observers noted that many Vlach families continued to send their children to Greek schools. As Nicolas Trifon points out, Romanian efforts were more successful in rural areas and among the peasantry, while Greek institutions retained influence among urban elites and merchants, such as in Manastir. To compete, Romanian schools often offered material incentives, food, clothing, and even financial support for the families of the students. So on the issue of religious service, the ecumenical patriarchate granted Vlachs the freedom to perform service in their own language, but this was mostly in theory. In practice, the local metropolitans were very powerful enough to not allow this happening. There were some places and occasions where religious service in a Romanian could be performed, but it was not common. So briefly, this is the cultural and historical background that I wanted to quickly introduce. So let's see, where does Papa Theodore fit in this? What is his story? The document dated March 4. So the document from February 22 about the Carnival is the first instance that Papa Theodore makes an entry into the Ottoman State Archives. And the next moment is March 4, 1904, just almost a week after the end of the Carnival. And the document explains that the reason why Theodore became a target, not only for the masqueraders, but also for the regional powers as well. According to the document, upon the death of a Vlach individual in a village, the villagers demanded Papa Theodore to perform the funeral service instead of a Greek-speaking priest. This probably happened before the Carnival, because the document talks about this as a past incident. And assuming that it happened before the Carnival also explains why the Rum kids were protesting against Papa Theodore during the Carnival. So by doing so, Papa Theodore violated the rule to perform service in Greek. He defied the authority of the Metropolitan of Monastir, who allegedly started mobilizing the community against him. On top of that, for his defiance, Theodore was summoned to Constantinople, to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, with the rumors that he was going to be arrested and excommunicated there. This act, it's local. It looks personal, but it's actually political, equally political. This triggered a direct clash. The Metropolitan responded by banning Theodore from performing any further religious services. And it is, I believe, the tension that the Carnival performance was reflecting on. Plus, it's important to note here that these were happening only a few months after the Ottoman army crashed the Bulgarian-led revolt, Ilinden uprising, against the state, which started in Manastir. I assume the tension was still fresh and the memory of that bloody revolt was still alive. So um, it's not also an isolated moment that these students, these kids, were reflecting on a tension in such a manner. It's not hard to imagine how Theodore's increasingly visible role among the Vlachs, especially in a charged moment, would become a target of satire or protest during the carnival. So we can say the main resentment was coming from a linguistic choice in religious life, which directly suggested a certain allegiance and defiance from the parties involved in the Macedonian struggle. So let's come to the consul, because remember, the banner that the kids were carrying in the carnival said Chingene consul. So what is his role here? The gypsy consul sign, the Romanian flag colors, and the kavas costume weren't random symbols. They were mockery born of real ongoing conflict. The Greek newspapers of the time revealed the connection between Theodore and the consul, and why this was disturbing for the Roman public. The thing is, he may have had support from the Romanian consulate, according to the Greek sources, and this may be true. This complicates the picture and suggests that it may not have been only a religious issue. Consuls were on the way. Consuls were one way through which rivaling countries could assert their influence in the region. In February 1904, days before the carnival, Greek newspapers expressed alarm over Romania's expanding diplomatic presence in Macedonia and Epirus. A new consulate had opened in Ioannina, and Manastir had just received a new Romanian consul, replacing the former. Tensions were already rising, and Theodore found himself at the center of that shift. Letters sent from Manastir to Athenian newspapers linked Theodore directly to the Romanian consul, accusing the consul of protecting him and giving him a certain power in the city, even alleging that young Greeks had been imprisoned for minor provocations, such as coughing in Theodore's presence on the streets. Whether true or exaggerated, these reports reveal something crucial. Theodore was no longer seen as just a local priest. He was being framed, in both positive and negative terms, as part of a larger foreign-backed agenda. Another publication, Ecclesiastica Aletheia, the official voice of the Patriarchate, went further. It labeled Theodore as a Romanian agent, not merely as a disobedient clergyman, but someone actively working to undermine the authority of the church and the unity of the Orthodox millet, Rum millet. This helps us understand the emotional weight behind the carnival protest. The teenagers' banner, with its slur, its national colors, and theatrical performance, reflected the shared resentment among segments of the community. To them, Theodore wasn't just exploring his identity or responding to a local demand. He was becoming a symbol of foreign interference, ecclesiastical betrayal, and the shifting balance of power. So thanks to the wide range of sources that feature him, I'm able to complete this picture with words from Theodore's mouth. And this is a very important point in his story because it's finally where we understand where his agency lies. A petition submitted to the Ottoman authorities revealed how Theodore viewed the whole situation and how he wanted to appeal to the Ottoman authorities. In other words, this is a document where we can get close to his agency, but it's still a complaint submitted to the imperial administrators with a certain ambition. So we have to also approach it with a certain caution. So following these events, the Metropolitan summoned Theodore to the Patriarchate in Istanbul with rumors of excommunication spreading. Instead of submitting himself to the Patriarchate, Theodore turned to the Ottoman authorities, filing complaints that the Metropolitan in Manastir was harassing him and inciting violence against him. And this is going to be a pattern in his story. In this critical telegraph, Theodore declared himself a true Vlach. He literally talks about himself, that I'm a true Vlach, and claimed that he was merely responding to the needs of his community. This moment marks the formal construction of Theodore's identity in the bureaucratic and diplomatic record, and from his own voice. No longer just a local priest in conflict with his superior, he now positioned himself and was seen by others as the Vlach priest. identity was not just assigned or declared, but formed in conflict, perception, and performance throughout the region, and by Theodore himself as well. He was now at the intersection of popular demand, imperial administration, ecclesiastical rivalry, and national diplomacy. So let's now zoom out and examine how this local conflict around a certain Papa Theodore played out at the regional level, involving the Romanian state, the ecumenical patriarchate, and the Ottoman government. So let's look at the Romanian side first. Theodore's case quickly moved beyond the local sphere, becoming a catalyst in Romania's broader diplomatic campaign to gain recognition for the Vlach community within the Ottoman Empire. What began as a local dispute over a funeral and a carnival sign soon escalated into something much larger. Theodore's case became a tool in regional diplomacy, caught in a power triangle between the three. So here, I have to give a brief background on the Romania's diplomatic efforts in the Ottoman center, Constantinople, and in Macedonia. Turkish historian Elçin Macar has recently published an article that outlines all the details of these diplomatic efforts of the Romanian state in Istanbul. He provides a detailed analysis of the whole period. He demonstrates that after the 1897 Greco-Turkish War, where the Greek state claimed that they could not get the Vlach support as much as they expected, the Romanian bureaucratic affairs in the Ottoman capital took a new turn. The arrival of a Romanian minister, Alexandru Lahovari, in Constantinople in 1902 shows that. Macar argues that Lahovari had a very clear objective: to extract the Vlachs from the jurisdiction of the ecumenical patriarchate and indirectly from the influence of the Greek state, and gain an independent millet status for the Vlach community in the Ottoman Empire. This would mean having the right to build their own churches, have service in their own language, and detach themselves from the influence of the other regional powers. So by 1904, Lahovari had already established strong ties with Ottoman officials in the center and had become a key player in the empire's delicate policy of regional balance. For the Ottoman state, Romania represented a useful counterweight to Greek influence in Macedonia, but antagonizing the ecumenical patriarchate risked alienating the Rum population, who could easily shift their loyalties toward the Greek state. So the result, the task of the Ottoman state was a very precarious equilibrium, with the empire with them trying to manage competing alliances without tipping too far in any direction. So in March 1904, just weeks after the Carnival incident, Alexandru Lahovari, the minister, sent a formal complaint to the Sublime Porte. Of course, he was aware of the case of Papa Theodore. He expressed deep disappointment, stating that the Ottoman government had previously promised that calm Vlachs, those not involved in subversion, would be allowed to worship in their own language. Instead, what Romania received was news of the arrest of a Vlach priest, Papa Theodore. Lahovari went further and warned that this action had even upset King Carol I of Romania and threatened to damage further relations. So even the King Carol I of Romania was aware of Papa Theodore's case. The pressure worked. The Ottoman Inspector General in Macedonia intervened, and Theodore was released from custody in Manastir. This was just the beginning. Lahovari saw an opportunity in Theodore's situation. He used the case to push for the appointment of a Romanian metropolitan in Macedonia. He started negotiating both with the Ottoman state and the ecumenical patriarchate, a bold move that was ultimately rejected. But he didn't stop there. Theodore's case became a bargaining chip in Lahovari's ultimate objective, the creation of a separate millet status for the Vlachs, and we'll see shortly what happens about that. But before that, I want to see what the ecumenical patriarchate responded, how they responded and how they viewed the whole situation. So if Romanian support for Theodore grew stronger, So did too the efforts to delegitimize him from the other side, from the ecumenical patriarchate side. Let's look at how they responded again. For both the ecumenical patriarchate and the Greek state, Theodore's actions and the growing Romanian involvement were perceived as a direct threat. Historian Evangelos Kofos notes that the Patriarchate and the Greek state disagreed on their broader strategy regarding the region. The Patriarch Joachim III was a proponent of Ottomanism, whereas the Greek state advocated for Megalidea. However, they were united on the Vlach case, and it was a common threat to fight against. So, in the eyes of the Patriarchate, Theodore was not simply disobedient. He was attempting to create a schism within the Orthodox Church, like the Bulgarians did a couple of decades ago. Their strategy was one of denial and erasure. The Patriarchate claimed that the Vlach community in Manastir did not exist, and that those who supported Theodore were either misled from outside the region or manipulated by material incentives. Theodore's legitimacy as a priest was also under attack. He was described in church letters as aniros, unholy, and uncanonical, accused of violating religious law and undermining Orthodox unity. Calls for his exile and excommunication were framed as necessary to protect the integrity of the church. Greek newspapers published letters sent by Rum subjects from Ottoman Macedonia. And these letters echoed these official lines that was presented by the Patriarchate and the Greek state. In this narrative, Vlachs were not distinct people, but rather ethnic Greeks speaking Aromanian, and they were true Macedonians, definitely not Romanians. Pro-Romanian Vlachs were portrayed as few in number, uneducated, and easily manipulated by Romania's economic incentives. One article recounted a banquet held by the Romanian consulate in Manastir, a celebration that allegedly ended with guests being pressured into signing a memorandum requesting more rights from the Ottoman administration. Later, some of the attendees were said to have gone to the Metropolitan to denounce the event as a scam, claiming that the attendees were paid to sign. Throughout these letters and articles, Theodore's name appears repeatedly, portrayed as a troublemaker, uncanonical priest, and a pawn of foreign interests in Macedonia. But returning to the question of his agency, it's important to remember that in this very context, he submitted a petition to the Ottoman authorities with the need to claim himself as a true Vlach, as the Vlach priest, and affirming his role as a Vlach figure. This moment illustrates how identities were not only claimed and asserted, but also produced in the very process of being denied, negated, and contested. So before I end, I want to go back to the incident of the Carnival to wrap up the story with where we started. So the tactic of the ecumenical patriarchate extended even to the Carnival of 1904 itself. In doing so, it confirmed something that historians of Carnival have long argued. Carnival is never just play, it's a political stage. In our case, what made the 1904 Carnival disturbing was not that it violated Christian norms, but it revealed something deeper. It scratched a wound in the region, the underlying social tensions, competing loyalties, and shifting identities that were shaping life in Ottoman Macedonia in early 20th century. So the ecumenical patriarchate was not happy with this reveal. In an official correspondence, the patriarchate rewrote the event entirely, denying the version that we see in the initial Ottoman report. So it was not Rum teenagers who were protesting Theodore. Vlach youth, it was the Vlachs who did it. So this is how their version goes. Vlach kids attacked Rum children during the carnival. They stole their sign. They painted it in Romanian flag. And the Vlach kids pretended as Rum kids. and they went to the streets, and they eventually delivered this protest and this banner to the Romanian consulate. So it was a plot. It was a plot to put Rum kids in a bad situation. That reversal of the story turned the victims into aggressors and vice versa. At this point, I'm also confused who may be right or wrong and who was who and where the truth lies. And to be honest, I'm also not interested in the truth because the carnival is exactly about that. And it's about reversal, it's about confusion, and it's about transgressions. And this moment fits so well into the Ottoman Macedonia, demonstrating the complexity of everyday life and identities at the beginning of 20th century, how things shifted so quickly. So as I begin to conclude, let me also briefly explain what happened to Theodore so we can finish our story, and to the Vlach question in the aftermath of this entanglement that unfolded in just a couple of months, from the end of February until May. So Theodore was almost certainly excommunicated. A letter from the Patriarchate to the Ottoman government in May 1904 indicates this decision. And later that year, a Greek language newspaper refers to him as a former priest. We can safely assume that he was no longer part of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. But he didn't remain without a position for too long. Within a year, Romanian minister Alexandru Lahovari would achieve his diplomatic goal. As Elchin Magyar shows, Lahovari's persistent lobbying paid off. In May 1905, 1 year after the Carnival, the Ottoman state granted the Vlachs official millet status, recognizing them as a distinct religious ethnic community separate from the Ecumenical Patriarchate. This was a symbolic and diplomatic victory for Romania, but as Magyar also notes, this new status didn't come into full effect right away. There were bureaucratic and structural limitations, and the Ottomans still had to maintain their balance with the Patriarchate. The same year, tensions peaked between Greece and Romania, and diplomatic relations were severed to be restored in 1913. Theodore, on the other hand, now officially a priest of a recognized millet, had gained institutional legitimacy, finally. But legitimacy on paper did not guarantee safety on the ground. Archival documents from 1905 and 1906 show that he continued to face violence and threats to his life. Attacks from members of the Greek community, including students of the local Greek school, were serious enough to prompt petitions for state protection. The last trace we have of him is dated February 1906, when he demanded security from the Ottoman authorities. After that, his trail goes cold. We don't know what happened to him. So what we do know is this: the Vlach millet's regal recognition would lose its significance just a few years later. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution brought the reproclamation of the Ottoman constitution, which turned the millet system ineffective. Within years, the Balkan wars would erupt, followed by World War I, redrawing borders and scattering populations across new and competing nation states. So when I say my concluding words, I want to put a video at the back, if Costa, you can help me with that. So this video is by Menaki brothers from 1905 Manastir from St. George Day. It's 1 year after, it's shortly after when Vlachs were granted a millet status, and 1 year after the Carnival incident itself. So I can't help myself but think maybe those masqueraders that I came across in the Ottoman document were there. Maybe Papa Theodore was there. So I'll just leave it here for you to watch as I conclude. Papa Theodore's story shows us that identity in late Ottoman Macedonia wasn't fixed or straightforward. It was something people negotiated, performed, and sometimes had to force upon them. His shift from a local Rum priest to the Vlach priest didn't happen in isolation. It came out of real tensions between neighbors, between empires, and between competing visions of the future. What began in the festive chaos of a carnival, a space where identities could be played with, mocked, or inverted, turned into a struggle over power, language, and legitimacy. And yet, this is exactly why his story matters. It reminds us that ordinary people were not just caught in history, they were shaping it. Through a funeral, a banner, a petition, a prayer, they became part of the machinery where identity was defined, contested, and sometimes even weaponized. And in telling his story, we get a glimpse not just of one man's life, but of how entire communities lived through empire, transformation, and the slow tightening grip of nationalism. And despite all hardship, violence, and pressure, and everyday negotiations, life continues. And as this video shows, there is always space for celebrating, even in times of distress and conflicting uh, perceptions of the future. Thank you very much for listening. And we can stop the video. Yeah, thank you.
Um, Thank you, Naz, for that absolutely fascinating presentation. I was quite impressed, to be honest. It was really good, really good. And hope your research continues along those lines. I'm sure there'll be some questions from the audience, but I have quite a few myself. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the state of affairs with Ottoman Archives? How easy is it for like an average researcher to access them, and just an overall sort of state of affairs? Because it was interesting that you're able to sort of find this document and then pursue it further. So can you elaborate on that? I know it's a fairly broad question, but if you can, yeah.
Yeah, sure, I can do that, and it's a good question. So, Ottoman state archives are completely centralized and, to a large extent, digitized. You can do word search in the archives website, and you can put filters based on the document type and the dates, so you can narrow down your research. So when you do this word research, you see the document and then a small summary of the document. If you're lucky, if the person who classified the document did a good job in their summary, you can get lucky and find more items, more documents related to your research. So and you can also download the images by paying a small amount of money. So you can do this research from anywhere in the world. That's fairly easier access, but then there's the limitation of language because it's in Ottoman script, in Arabic script. But it's fairly easy. So when I typed Papa Theodore, of course, there's also the issue of spelling. Papa Theodore appeared in different spellings. It was Todor, Theodore. So I had to do a couple of trials with my search. But it was one of the moments that I was very lucky to find other documents about him. It doesn't usually happen that often. Also.
The Vlach language and also Romanian, Eastern Romance languages, how intelligible are they? You know, what degree of similarity or likeness do they have? Are they is the language intelligible between them, or have you?
To be honest, I'm not an expert on the Vlach language or the history. I'm still getting to know better. I met friends who have Vlach people in their family and Vlach origins. They explain me better because it's not also easy to find any scholarly work on this, especially in English language. Probably in Greek there may be, in Romanian they may be. But what I understand from the historical context is that Romania opened Romanian schools where they were teaching Romanian and Aromanian. So I assume there was a close link between them. People could navigate in both. That's my assumption, but I may not be correct.
Look, I think some of the questions here. What's the state? I know it's something you haven't quite researched, but in case you've come across readings, what's the state of the of the Vlach language today? I suppose, do Vlachs identify with Greek culture, or they prefer complete independent identity? I suppose the question is, which Vlachs are you talking about? I presume it means the Vlachs in Greece.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the complicated part of it. Which Vlachs are we talking about? And I cannot really speak for today, and I'm really tied to the historical materials that I'm working when making claims. So what the historical documents and travelers, observers state about the early 20th century is that Vlach language was mostly spoken at home. It was more language spoken among family and friends, but in public space, when doing business at school, it was Greek or other regional languages that were more useful. But of course, we have to make this distinction between the city and the villages. The city was, as the historical sources and secondary sources show, that the cities, like Manastir, was very well connected with the Greek commercial life and Greek intellectual life. So it makes sense that Greek was a more dominant language there. But Turkish was spoken. And interestingly, I know some Vlachs, I think, had a Muslim background, and with the population exchange, they came to Turkey. So there's a small Vlach community in Turkey, but I don't know their linguistic ties with the Vlach language, if they could preserve it or not. So it's a very complex group of people scattered around. And I also know, I haven't done extensive readings on that, but apart from Greek speaking Vlachs and the Romanian influence, and like people siding with the Romanian side, there's a Romanian nationalist movement as well that doesn't side with any of them. So I want to also recognize that here.
The question we have: were carnivals in the Ottoman Balkans a national affair, or I presume a monoethnic affair, or an event of intercommunal interactions?
Can you repeat the question?
Carnivals in the Ottoman Balkans a national affair or an event of intercommunal interactions? It's in the chat.
That's something I'm still trying to figure out in my work. That's exactly what my PhD dissertation is about, and I'm here in Greece for archival research to be able to understand that. I think in a couple of years I'll have a better answer, but I assume, like my theory kind of, is that when the Balkans transitioned from the Ottoman Empire to Greek nation state, Greek kingdom, there was a shift in the way carnivals were celebrated. Already the carnivals under the Ottoman Empire featured flags and royal portraits, so there was already a shift towards there. But of course, later on, especially after the interwar period, carnivals gained a more nationalist narrative with a certain understanding of the Ottoman past and legitimacy, and situating the carnivals as in certain places as a resistance against the Ottomans, with some historical narratives involved in the carnivals. So there's a turn towards that. But if I can speak about carnivals in Istanbul, which is a unique case, it's a celebration of a minority group in a Muslim country. In the early decades of the Republic, which I also explained in my talk 2 years ago, that carnival was highly targeted as being Greek, as being foreign, as being this victory celebration of the Greeks trying to take back Istanbul in 1930s and 20s. So it goes both ways. Both people portrayed it as a more national celebration, but also states, in the case of Turkish Republic, states started to reframe it as a Greek celebration, whereas it was, in my opinion, was an imperial festival.
Okay. This is a question here, and I have a bit of information on it. Were Vlachs allowed to have their own schools? Firstly, let me say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Naz, that Vlach wasn't a written language. And when Vlachs did go to such schools, they were basically Romanian schools. And there were some Romanian schools of Vlachs even until the 1940s, if not even 1950s in Greece as well. So is that correct, or?
Yes, that's what I came across also. That's why these schools are Romanian schools. There are still there were efforts of writing down a Romanian language in those schools, but they didn't really take shape into a solid movement. So Romanian was the main language in these schools because the teachers were sent from Romania, and there were efforts to standardize the Vlach language, but like I said, it didn't take a real shape,
Um,
as far as I understand, of course.
in Ottoman Macedonia, this is another question. When the Ottomans carried out a sentence, the Vlachs, how did they declare themselves? I mean, what was their ethnic identity? How did they declare themselves in Ottoman Macedonia? When the Ottoman do a
They
census?
were in the censuses. I should check Ipek Yosmola's article again, chapter again. I don't quite remember, but they were so until 1905. Officially, they were part of the Rum millet because Rum didn't identify with like completely identify with Greeks. Rum was Greek Orthodox community. And then later Bulgarians got their own millet identity. So by 1905, Vlachs were considered as Rum. But we know from Ipek Yosmola's article that there were some subcategories when Ottoman censuses were taking shape at the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century. They were like the documents, the Ottoman documents, talks about them as Ulah, not as rooms. So they make the differentiation in the administrative documents and reports from the region. They are considered as Ulah. They never used millet for Ulah before 1905, but they were considered as a separate category under the jurisdiction of the ecumenical patriarchate, under the Rum millet. So they were referred as Ulah, and after 1905, they become a separate millet alongside Rums and Bulgarians. But as Elçin Macar shows, this never takes effect in reality. In theory, they are supposed to be able to build churches and do service in their own language, but the Ottoman state kind of puts limitations on that, not to antagonize the ecumenical patriarchate. So it's kind of a goal achieved on the part of Romania, but
In
it's
practice.
in real life, in practice, it didn't change that much.
Okay, I think I need to bring things to a close. We're past our hour, and apology if I've left out any questions. Thanks once again, Naz. It's an excellent presentation, and I'm sure we'll have you back at some future point as well. Thank you, everyone, for those who listened in, and hope to see you next week's seminar as well. Good night, everyone.